Hello everyone, welcome to Read Out News. We are here with Marv Hagedorn. He is candidate for Idaho's Lieutenant Governor, and he's graciously joined us here over a cup of coffee to talk about his candidacy. Would you give me a sound check over there?
Sure. Testing 1, 2, 3. Up a high hill, he's a huge round stone. Betty bought her butt some butter, but she said this butter's bitter. I put it in my batter a little bit, my batter bitter.
Very good, very good. Okay, this should do it for us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you before we get into any questions?
Okay. I grew up in North Idaho. I grew up in between Moscow and Potlatch on a little farm. I graduated from high school in Potlatch in 1974. I have spent plenty of time on a D4 pulling a disc, throwing hay in a barn, even worked in the mill in Potlatch before it closed down and disappeared. Joined the Navy and spent 20 years in the Navy. I enlisted and I was in the intelligence business, cryptologist, and I got commissioned to Chief Warrant Officer in 14 years. I was a chief, enlisted chief for 5 years, frozen in grade, and as we were talking about, I was selected early for Chief Warrant Officer, and so I kind of hung around as a chief for 5 years, and that was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, because I learned that you don't do things to get promoted, you do things because they're right. Because I knew I was going to get promoted, so I worked hard and I did things as a chief, and I had a lot of fun. And I did the same thing as a Chief Warrant Officer. I started a special operations team my last tour in the Navy. We started a interesting detachment in Anchorage, Alaska, and we would deploy out of there. So I spent a lot of time in the bush, a lot of time in very cold weather and very hot weather.
Is that why you like Idaho?
Yeah, that's right. You have to be in Idaho and to like all of that.
Yeah, you can get all 4 seasons in one day
It's
out
a
here.
fact, yeah. After I retired, I came home back to Potlatch, and it was during the Clinton administration. And if you didn't already have a farm or were logging somewhere, you just didn't work. There was no jobs anywhere. And so I ended up going down to what Mom and Dad still call the flatlands of Idaho. Lived in Meridian and lived down there for 23, 24 years. And I went to work for a semiconductor industry and supported Micron all around the world. I inherited about a $7 million business unit, and I grew that to $100 million a year. I had people that worked for me all around the world. And that was a very interesting situation, because when the people in Japan go to bed, the people in Italy are waking up. And so you pretty much run a 24-hour day when you're managing people all around the world. But that's what it took, and so that's what we did. So I started my own company. I grew from nothing to $3 million a year, and I figured out I was bringing in dozers and tractors and excavators and those kinds of things from Asia. And I figured out how to import mini trucks, because mini trucks are all over every other continent except the United States, because the big three, GM, Ford, and Chrysler, had import regulations where you could not import mini trucks because they wanted that market. And so I figured out how to import mini trucks through U.S. Customs. So I started bringing them in. And I grew my business up to $3 million a year. Being the middleman, I had buyers all over Asia, and I had set up retailers all over the U.S., and I was just sending container loads of these mini trucks all over the U.S. And I'd figured out how to put seven mini trucks inside a 40-foot container. And so we could maximize the amount of transportation dollars that it cost us. And all of my folks were selling these things for retail about $4,500. Well, then John Deere and Polaris started coming out with their Gators and Rangers, and they were starting theirs at $10,000. And I was killing their market share. So their lobbyists that are on staff in Washington started going between the Department of Transportation, U.S. Customs, and the EPA. And every month they would create a regulation and it would come out in the Federal Registry to put me out of business. So I had to hire my own lobbyist back in DC, and I paid $85,000 a year for this guy, and I both watched the Federal Registry every month, and we had basically it was a form letter, because every month one was gone. And so we would send this letter saying, here's how many people you're going to put out of work should this thing change. And this is a fair market issue. You know, these guys shouldn't control this market. And we did that for 3.5 years, and I protected that business for 3.5 years. And then the governor had
And learned a lot about lobbyists during.
Oh man. And the governor had appointed me to be on a transportation funding task force. And while I was on that task force, they came out with a regulation and they stuck it in the marine engine code. It had nothing to do with my little trucks, but they put it in the marine engine code, and I missed it, and my lobbyists missed it. And once a regulation is posted on the Federal Registry for 30 days, if no one complains about it, no one posts anything about it, it becomes basically law and goes into effect. And that's what happened. I had 11 containers of mini trucks on the water when this thing went into full force and effect. And it was everything I could do but give them my firstborn child to be able to get those trucks into the U.S., to get them to the buyers. And it basically shut my business down.
And that's what made you...
Well, as you can imagine, I'm very sensitive to the government getting involved in someone else's business.
Yes.
So, yeah, and when I retired, I've hunted and fished in the panhandle all my life. And so, well, thank you. We're getting lunch here. Well, and so when I retired and came home, one of the first things they decided to do, or someone decided to do, was move wolves into Idaho, import them from Canada. It doesn't take a rocket science to figure out how bad that was going to be for our ungulates and how bad that was going to be for the local economies, especially in rural Idaho. Because, tourism is big. Hunting and fishing is big in rural Idaho. And so I used to go down and testify before the Natural Resources Committee every legislative session and talk about the data on what was going to happen to Idaho if these wolves were just let go. And one time, one of the lobbyists, actually Judy Boyle, she was then a lobbyist for, I want to say that cattlemen, but I don't recall. She said, Marv, why don't you just run? You're down here all the time anyway, and you got all this natural resource stuff down. Why don't you just run? And it was never on my bucket list of things to do. But I did, and I lost. I lost my first race by 200 votes, and it was the most painful thing I'd ever done because I don't like to campaign. And it all worked out because we had a shakeup in our district, and the governor, I was one of the 3 that was sent by my district to the governor, and the governor called me up and said, hey, do you want to take this seat? It was an open seat in the House the first week of the 2007 legislative session. I'm good, thank you. And so that first week, I didn't have a chance to go through new guy school. I just went in and I asked the speaker, what am I supposed to do? And he said, you got a red button and a green button and a white button. When we're doing roll call, you push the white button, and when we vote, you push the green button or the red button. And that was my instructions for going into the legislature. And having been a chief warrant officer in the Navy, my job was to kill the enemy, and the enemy was the Democrats. And that's who I went after. And I was like a bull in a china shop. And I burned a lot of bridges, but I learned a lot of lessons. And so that's kind of how I got my start. So
Okay, I'm going to move on to a few other, related questions. Have you read the U.S. Constitution?
hundreds of times.
Have you? Well, believe it or not, a lot of people haven't actually read it. What about the Idaho State Constitution?
I have, yes, absolutely.
Okay. And what is your understanding of the job of Lieutenant Governor as related to the Constitution?
Our Constitution, the job of the Lieutenant Governor, is to preside over the Senate. And what that means is the Lieutenant Governor runs the floor. And so the Lieutenant Governor has got to understand the rules of the Senate. He's got to understand the laws of the state that have to do with running the Senate, and make sure that, and we go by Mason's rules. So you have to understand Mason's rules. Your job is to run the Senate and ensure that everyone gets a fair hearing on the bills that are on the floor. They get the chance to vote equally. And if they want to protest, they have the opportunity to protest. That's the number one job of the Lieutenant Governor. There is no, the only accommodation for the Lieutenant Governor being involved in legislation is if there is a tie on the floor vote. The Lieutenant Governor then steps in to his legislative duties and breaks the tie, votes one way or another. In my 6 years in the Senate, I've seen a Lieutenant Governor vote 4 times. The other job of the Lieutenant Governor is to be the advisor to the governor, also to step into the governor's seat when the governor is out of state, and keep things on track. He also traditionally does a lot of screening for boards and commissions and department heads. We've got 100 department heads that are going to need to be appointed or reappointed. We've got 400 boards and commissions that are going to need to be filled. So
you think that's too much?
Yeah, I do.
Is there any way to reduce that number?
Sure, we can, but the legislature has got to do that.
Can you influence any of that as Lieutenant Governor?
You can, but you have to be very careful at that, because both the House leadership and the Senate leadership, you're not invited into their caucus. You could be a Republican, the strongest Republican you want to be, but they're the legislature, and they set the policy. So you can talk to the leadership, and you can talk to different members that you have influence with, and let them know that maybe these things need to be taken care of. You also, but your main influence is with the governor. I've never seen a Lieutenant Governor bill in the legislature in 12 years. I can't think of one that's ever been done. Lieutenant Governors don't do bills.
Right.
That comes from the governor.
Well, do you think that you would have any influence over keeping the bills out of the committee drawers?
No.
None at all? You wouldn't even try?
Because, you can try.
Well, that's where I want to go with this, because
you have to be very careful, because
okay,
that is the job of leadership in the Senate and leadership in the House. If you step on their toes by trying to influence people you shouldn't be messing with in the legislature, you're in the executive branch. There will be backfire from doing that. See, you have to respect.
Kind of like the governor pushing the fact that he didn't want the CBD oil bill to go forward, and
there will be backfires.
But that's the problem, is it still got buried because the governor did not want that bill.
I don't know if that was the reason, or if the reason was there weren't the votes in the Senate to pass that bill.
I don't know. All I know is what he said within hearing of that reporter. And that made a big difference.
Well, I think not what the governor said.
Right, not the governor.
It was one of the senators said.
Right.
That the governor didn't want. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what else do you think you can accomplish as Lieutenant Governor beyond, presiding over the Senate and stepping in for the governor? What is your main platform, and what would you like to see accomplished?
I want to be involved in economic development and helping control. Our biggest challenge now in the future is going to be controlling our growth. We've been discovered, and businesses and people are moving to Idaho. We've got to figure out a way to control that, to keep our character, to keep. If a town in rural Idaho doesn't want to grow, if they like the way they are, just allow them to be the way they are. I don't want to force any companies to move in on them. They need to control their destiny. Every community needs to be involved in that. As I mentioned a little earlier, I think maybe not on this, but I do love and know how to do economic development and grow business. I had heard, someone had called me and told me that there was a new medical school that was going into Montana, and the governor had kind of turned on them. They had approval by their Board of Education and the governor, and so they hired a dean, and he moved to Montana, and they started the process to build their medical school. But then the governor kind of turned on them. And so I had heard that, so I called them up and I said, would you guys be interested in coming to Idaho? And I invited them to come visit. We did a tour of the lab facilities at ISU, and they said, let's talk and see if we can do this. So I went to the governor and I told him of the opportunity, and he said, well, let's see what we can do. So I put a team together. We negotiated with the Idaho College of Osteopathic Medicine, and in 30 days we had created a public-private contract partnership where they would come into Idaho, build $1 million building on Idaho land that they will lease. They lease lab services from ISU. They are going to provide priority student placement in the Idaho College of Osteopathic Medicine, which is ICOM. Priority for Idaho students, and they're going to give $3 million worth of scholarships just to Idaho students. So we got our first medical school. We got $3 million worth of scholarships.
How soon?
They're starting this fall, and the building is now built. They've hired probably 3/4 of the staff, and they're right now bringing in students or taking applications for students. And so this August, I think, is when the first class is going to start, and they're going to run 150 people per class every year. So we're going to have 100. We're going to have 5 years course. So we're going to have quite a number of medical doctors that are going to start coming out of the ICOM school.
Okay, on that same topic of medicine, include Obamacare and your thoughts and what you'd like to see done, etc.
What a mess.
It is, yes, I agree.
And I tell you,
how can we fix it?
I have run a number of bills to try and get us so we can negotiate something different than what we have as a state. I'm really counting on President Trump to turn this off, to turn the whole thing off. And he basically did when he took away the mandates. One of the bills that I ran was to negotiate the mandates away. And I was basically going to say 2 years ago, I had a bill that said, if you take away our mandates to buy, we'll expand Medicaid. But you've got to take away the mandates for business and people to have to buy the insurance on the exchange. But we couldn't. I mean, we cannot negotiate with CMS until the legislature passes a bill that says we will negotiate. CMS will not negotiate with the state. And so and it was just like the bill that they did this year. They had 2 waivers that they were proposing, so CMS would negotiate so we could have what we call skinny insurance plans, and where we were going to take insurance and healthcare are 2 different things. We have a problem with healthcare delivery, and we have a problem with insurance. And both of those problems interlace. The insurance problem is that for those people that don't buy an insurance policy and would rather pay the fine, when they go into an emergency room, the emergency room is required to provide them medical care. That medical care is the most expensive that's provided. So if they have the flu, if they have a hangnail, whatever their problem is, they go to the emergency room to get that taken care of. We did in Idaho, our hospitals gave away $200 million of what they consider charitable care. In other words, people that go to the emergency room or go for surgery and don't pay their bills. So what the hospitals then do is they roll that $200 million of charitable care into next year's costs. We know that we're going to have to give away $200 million of charitable care, So we have to add onto our prices $200 million because we've got to make that up. That's a problem with healthcare, the healthcare delivery system. On the other side, with the insurance system, we have about 2,000 people that are seriously, seriously ill. And there's one person that we spend about $1 million a year on. Those 2,000 people are covered under insurance. And so the insurance companies, when they do their amortization tables, they've got to include those 2,000 people in what we pay for insurance. Because those folks that have the really critical needs, they're not paying for it, right? So our insurance premiums continue to go up because the hospitals have added on to their prices to make up for that $200 million. And then the insurance companies have to increase their prices to make up for those 2,000 people that are really seriously ill. So the idea was to take those 2,000 people out of that pool and put them into a special pool that we would cover with Medicaid. So our premiums will start to go down. It was also, in the last bill, was to take and provide the plans on the insurance exchange right now have to have 10 essential benefits. I pay for maternity care. I don't need maternity care.
No, really?
I know. But we all pay for that. So the objective was to get back to what Idaho had for insurance requirements before, which is buy the plan that you need. So we would have a minimal number of essential benefits that we would say all plans have to have these minimal benefits. But if you want vision care, you can add that on. You want maternity care, you can add that on. Those types of things. That's the way Idaho insurance used to be.
What do you think about taking insurance across state lines?
Well, that's a federal restriction that we've got. Julie Ellsworth and I ran a bill in the House in 2007, I think it was, or 2008, to do insurance across state lines. But there's a federal regulation. It's not a law, it's a regulation. It doesn't allow you to do that. And the more we looked into it, our insurance at that time cost less than insurance in all the surrounding states because we had the minimal essential benefits. And so it wouldn't have done us much good to buy across state lines because our insurance was already cheaper.
Well, not necessarily the neighboring state, but possibly a few states away. Is there?
There at the time that we did that, we were one of the lowest cost states in the nation.
Yeah, but not anymore.
Probably not anymore. Yeah. We have got to do something because the system's not working.
Is that an issue you think you can work with President Trump and get the federal?
Absolutely. We have to. We can't sit on our laurels and just let things sit the way they are. My dad taught me, if you always do what you always done, you always get what you always got.
I like that.
And we're doing what we've always done for the last few years. We keep doing the same thing over and over again. We have got to change. We have got to move the ball. So.
Let's talk about a couple other issues. I don't know how much you follow social media.
Yeah.
But on social media, we're seeing an awful lot of activism by today's young people, okay? They have taken to protesting, walking out of class to protest for gun control. And then we have a few on the other side that are protesting in favor of the Second Amendment. But the big movement was for gun control. Now, well, I'll let you weigh in on that one and then we'll move forward. How does that sound?
Well, where I stand on gun control is I'm a right-handed shooter, and that's the best way I can control my pistol. Although I don't need one, I wrote or helped write the enhanced carry bill, the permitless carry bill, the preemption bill. Just about 90% of all the gun bills that have passed in the last 12 years, I've been an author or co-author of. I'm a life member of the NRA, so is my dad, so is my son. I'm a believer in guns, and self.
Now you say because you don't, even though you don't need one, is that because you're a legislator?
Yes.
Okay,
And
how do you feel about repealing that one?
Well, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to repeal it. We've got permitless carry.
No,
And so-
I meant for a specific group of people like legislators. I'm talking about the benefits that legislators get over everybody else.
I have no problem at all with repealing that.
Okay,
Yeah.
because I'm told, and honestly, I'm not going to spend my time looking into it, but I'm told that the legislators get a lot more benefits. Therefore, they puts them into a different class of people. How do you weigh in on that?
I wrote there's a couple of things that legislators get, like they could carry without a permit, which bothers me, because there's some legislators that have absolutely no training. And that's a real concern.
Okay.
If something was to happen in the legislature while we're in session, it's going to look like Star Wars. There's going to be lasers going all over the place because there's too many legislators that are carrying with their little lasers that don't know how to properly utilize a weapon to protect themselves. I'm a big training guy. I think people need to have training. And I think that perk should go away. I also wrote a bill the last 2 years. I've had a bill to do away with pension spiking. The House passed it. I tried to get it out of state affairs in the Senate.
Oh, another bill that was buried in a drawer.
Yeah.
How about that?
I couldn't get it out of committee in state affairs, and that was to do away with the pension spiking. But you know what?
Right. Well, let's stay on the Second Amendment.
Yeah.
What do you think about bump stocks? What do you think about high-capacity magazines?
This is my bump stock. I built a 300 blackout and a 223, and if I want to shoot full auto, all I have to do is put my thumb against my waist into the trigger, and it goes on its own. So I think a lot of those things are kind of ridiculous. The Democrats and the liberals are looking for excuses not to look truly what the problems are. And if we were smart, the Second Amendment supporters were smart, we would start looking at what the real problems are. Every time we have one of these shootings that's caused by a behavioral health problem or a mental health problem, we're standing tall to protect our Second Amendment. Why don't we go after the behavioral health problem and the mental health problem in the first place? That's where we all need to be. Then we wouldn't have to stand tall against the Second Amendment because nobody would get that far.
Absolutely. What do you think about arming teachers in schools?
We actually have armed teachers in schools, and we did that bill. I can't remember. It was probably 5 or 6 years ago. We did a bill to allow each school district to make that determination and allow teachers to be armed in schools. And so now we have some pretty creative school districts out there, and I'm very proud of what they've done.
Kansas just recently submitted a bill, and I don't know that it will get put into law, but it's an interesting bill in that they want to hold schools accountable if they do not allow teachers to be armed. They want to hold them accountable if there are any shootings, etc. How do you feel about that?
I think that's a good thought process. We started to go down that road a couple of years ago with courthouses. You go into a courthouse where you can't carry, then who's going to protect you? And if I have to give up my weapon in a courthouse, who's going to hold that? Where's it going to be stored securely so I know nobody's going to steal my weapon? We haven't figured those out yet. We haven't figured out the wording on how to do that yet. But anytime I go to a place that's designated as a gun-free zone, that means someone else is responsible for protecting me. And they better...
You have to know you can trust them.
That's right. And they better do it right. That was one of the concerns we had with campus carry bill that we did, was compromising to get it passed. That was all we had to. We had to give them like venues of 1,000 people or more that they could. We can't carry, and that was like BSU in a stadium or something like that. That was the only way we get the votes to get that. That is still a problem still a thorn in my side. But we'll keep working on those things.
Okay, some of our youth, they do some silly things. They're eating these Tide Pods, and the new fad is believe it or not, snorting condoms.
I cannot figure out, once you get the Tide Pod in a condom, how do you?
I don't even want to know.
I don't understand how to do that. Yeah.
My point is there are people who think that the voting age and the age to buy a gun should be raised, and some of these kids make you want to jump right on. But then again, is it constitutional? Is it a good thing? How do you feel about all of that?
We had a bill this last session that wanted to raise the age to buy cigarettes to 21. And that was a real struggle because we all know cigarettes are killing people. But we also know that I hand a gun to a young man of 18 years of age and he fights for my country. That man is an adult at that point. And we've all decided that the age of 18 is an adult. And I voted against that bill because if you do well enough to be able to carry a gun and fight for your country, then you're an adult, and you should be responsible for your actions.
What do you think about Scotchman's Peak?
I think the feds need to keep their hands off of it. That really frustrates me that we're even talking about wilderness, more wilderness in Idaho. That is very frustrating. And along with Scotchman's Peak, you should know I've reached out to Department of DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, which is our liaison between the EPA and the state, and they are very active in the silica smelter that has been proposed for Newport, or over in Newport. And out of their Coeur d'Alene office, they're asking some really, really tough questions on what the plan is for that smelter there. I think it needs to not go there because the prevailing winds will blow everything from that smelter over here in the Panhandle, and that's ridiculous. So.
Okay, next one. I believe there are 3 different issues that are being wrapped up into one. You've got immigration, you've got illegal immigration, and then you've got refugees.
Right.
I believe they were 3 separate issues. How do you feel about all of that?
You're absolutely right. The refugee, let's take that one first. The refugee issue was very frustrating for us because that's run out of the State Department. And the State Department would notify Idaho at the end of every year how many refugees they brought into Idaho. It's a federal program that we can't even write a bill for to ask or to demand that they can't do that, which is very frustrating. The Trump administration has taken care of that, significantly reduced that. It's still frustrating that we don't have a say in that, but we've got to get that fixed at the federal level. The second is illegal immigration. We're spending a ton of money on illegal immigrants. They're part of our healthcare problem. When they get hurt, they go to the emergency room and they don't pay their bills. We need a wall, no question. We need a wall, we need better security. We need to fix our immigration system. The reason that those illegals are coming here is because our immigration system is broken.
Catch and release, right.
Yeah, well, this morning I heard on the news that Trump signed a executive order that says catch and release is no longer valid, which is the right thing to do. We're basically going to start following the law. Hallelujah. So, yeah, big problems with immigration.
What do you think about the National Guard going down to the southern border?
You know what? I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I think there's a lot of opportunity for the Guard to help the Border Patrol, because the Border Patrol is stretched really thin. The Guard can go down and exercise and learn how to use our drones better. We can learn surveillance better. I think there's a lot of opportunity that our guardsmen can really start to practice that we might be able to use in other conflicts and back up our Border Patrol. And I think it also provides an opportunity for Congress to really understand long term, it's going to be much more cost effective for us to spend the money and build a wall. You've got to invest in that infrastructure. Otherwise, you're going to be paying people big money for a long time, and basically it's not going to create anything. We've got to invest in that infrastructure.
So let's talk a little bit about federal law versus state law versus, let's just talk state sovereignty. How's that?
Okay.
States' rights, 10th Amendment. Tell me your feelings on that, and I may go further with it depending on what you say.
Okay. I'm a big 10th Amendment guy. One of the things that is very frustrating to me is that there's been almost 200 Supreme Court decisions defining what the 10th Amendment is. I'm a big constitutional guy. The Article 3 of the Constitution sets up the Supreme Court. Article 1 sets up the executive branch, 2 is the legislative branch, 3 is the Supreme Court. Everyone is equal, and we have to respect what everyone does, which means that those Supreme Court decisions, whether we like them or not, are part of law. And so the 10th Amendment is very simple language, one sentence. But these 200 court decisions have modified so greatly our 10th Amendment. That's why...
You're talking about legislating from the bench,
yes,
though.
Yes.
And I have a problem with that.
I do too.
Okay.
I do too, but because the Supreme Court is set up in our Constitution, how do you change what they have legislated from the bench in the past? The only way to change that is to challenge Roe versus Wade again. So
Okay, now again, the way I see
rule.
it, and you can correct me on this, that was an opinion. That was not a law. That was an opinion by SCOTUS, okay, in which it was implemented by Congress.
It was a decision.
All right.
It was a decision by SCOTUS.
What's the difference?
Because
a decision is law.
A decision becomes case law. And that's why is what Congress needs to do. Congress needs to change the definition of abortion. And if Congress changes the definition of abortion, that previous case law goes out the window until someone challenges that again and goes back before the Supreme Court. We have failed in Congress to challenge those case laws by changing the definitions in our code and then re-challenging those case laws back through the judicial system. I don't understand why we've not done that. I've talked to some brilliant lawyers. If there was a way that we could use state sovereignty to overturn Roe versus Wade, it would have been done years ago. There's 3,000 lawyers in state legislatures all over the U.S. If one of those guys had an idea on how to do it, it would have been done.
Well, let me throw a couple of other types of cases at you. At least one more. Again, we'll go back to Kansas. Okay, Kansas passed a couple of years ago what it was considered the strongest anti-gun control law in the nation. Okay, and basically it said that if the federal government comes in to take a gun from a Kansas resident that was built in Kansas and never crossed state lines, okay, that the federal agent could be held liable and actually go to jail over this.
Right.
Eric Holder challenged that law, found a couple of guys that actually, the one guy built, I believe it was, I'd have to go back and look, I think it was a scope, but it was a part to a gun. And the other guy, his friend, bought that part and did a YouTube demonstration of it to give it his opinion on it. They were arrested, they were tried, and they were found guilty. Okay? Because the governor who had signed this law would not stand up for them. Okay? And the people that were involved with this law would not stand up for them. How do you feel about all of that?
We wrote that law in Idaho, I want to say in 2010. Representative Dick Harwood and I and a couple other folks did basically the same law. except we changed some of the terms that Kansas had a problem with. It exists in Idaho today.
It does. The federal
Yes.
agents could?
Yes.
Okay.
If you build a weapon in Idaho, or a suppressor in Idaho, you have the sovereignty in our state to do that.
So long as you don't
is-
take it across state lines?
Yes.
Okay.
The challenge is, will an ATF officer arrest you? And will the state stand up for you?
Right.
If I'm your lieutenant governor, I will fight to make sure that the state stands up for you. I think that was a very important law that we had. I also, I did another bill in these dates. I want to say it was 2013, Senate Bill 1099. I wrote to take suppressors off of the tax stamp in Idaho, to make them just a regular gun part. And it was called the Hearing Protection Act. And so I had that bill printed. Then I took Idaho at the time in 2012. We were spending $437,000 every year on hearing mitigation through health and welfare, Medicaid, on hearing mitigation just due to gunfire. And so I took all of that information and I gave it to Senator Crapo's office. And that is now finally bubbled up and is now floating around between the House and the Senate at the federal level, called the Hearing Mitigation Act. And so hopefully we'll get a signature on that bill soon, and we'll get suppressors off of the tax stamp, Class 3.
Well, I only have a few more questions for you, and I do appreciate your patience with me.
No, this is
today.
fun. This is what I do. This is what you guys. This is what I get paid to do.
Okay. Let me get out my notes here. I had some. Is the Constitution number one with you? Will you always support the Constitution first?
I've taken an oath. I wish I could remember how many times I've taken an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Now, what if the people in the state of Idaho want you to do something different? What if the majority of the people vote for something that you feel is unconstitutional? Will you fight against them, or will you fight for them?
Boy, that's a tough question.
Yeah, it is. That's why I threw it out there.
Yeah.
A lot of people do not understand the Constitution and
Right.
do not understand what, it's like the gun control thing.
Yeah.
They do not understand what they're asking for.
Right.
So, what will you do? Vote your conscience, or fight for your conscience on the Constitution, or will you fight for what the people want?
I'm a constitutional guy. I support the Constitution. If that means I have to go out and train 1.7 million Idahoans on what that means, that's what it's going to have to be.
Okay, so it's always the Constitution,
Always the Constitution.
not necessarily the people,
No.
even though, well, you know,
We
they would.
live in the United States of America, and the United States of America is based on all of our laws. The foundation of all of our laws, our U.S. Constitution. That's it. And I will defend that to my death.
Okay. I have not yet looked at your Sunshine Report. What am I going to find when I do look at it? Am I going to get any surprises?
I don't think so.
Is most of your donations through within state, or are they from out of
Yeah,
state?
all of mine are within state.
Well,
In
not
fact,
everybody can say the same thing. That's part
yeah.
of why I asked the question.
Yeah. The majority of my campaign, my wife and I are funding. When I was in the Senate, I was always the biggest donor to my campaign. I always had more money and that I donated or that I loaned into my campaign than anyone else.
Do you have any big PACs or big companies that have donated to you that we will end up questioning when we take a look at it? Like I said, I apologize because I
No,
did not
that's
think to
okay.
look at it ahead of
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
You don't
I
have any Monsantos, you don't have any,
No.
okay.
No, I don't have. Most of mine are individuals. I'm trying to think if there's any. No, I don't think there will be any surprises. I think, like I say, I think the biggest surprise will probably be how much my wife and I have loaned into this campaign. I'm dedicated to winning this campaign because we're looking at the greatest turnover our state has ever seen in elected officials. And it concerns me. I don't want to say it scares me, but it concerns me. that we have got to have somebody in a position that can bridge that communications between the House leadership, the Senate leadership, and the new governor. I don't know who the new governor is going to be. I haven't even chosen who it's going to be. But somebody has got to provide some continuity. And all my life, that's what I've been good at. And so that's what I want to do, and that's why I'm running. Because I don't want our state, I don't want the train to get off the tracks. We're going in such a great direction.
Well, I was going to ask you how you thought Brad Little had done on his job as lieutenant governor, but maybe I shouldn't ask that. What do you think?
I think, Brad is actually, in my opinion, has been a great lieutenant governor. In, my 3 months a year with him in the House, in the Senate, he presides over the Senate floor very fairly. Make sure everyone, Democrat or Republican, have their say on the floor. Anyone who wants to protest, he runs the floor very well. I've only seen him vote 4 times to break a tie. He's done a good job at representing the state when he travels on missions overseas. Brought some good business into the state. And he's represented the state in a number of ways. He's represented the governor in a number of ways a lot of people don't know about. When veterans, as an example, get a Purple Heart or are recognized for a Medal of Honor. I went with Brad on one trip to Fairfield. No, it wasn't Fairfield. It was Richmond, which nice little place out in the middle of nowhere. And we did a recognition for a sailor that had passed away and received the Medal of Honor. Nobody knows about those things, but Brad does all of those things. So I think he's done a great job as lieutenant governor. I sat next to Raul in the House for 4 years. Raul and I have a great working relationship, and we talk all the time. And so I can work with Raul, I can work with Brad. I don't know about Tommy. I've only met him on the campaign trail. Seems like a nice guy, seems ambitious. Actually seems, when I went into the House, I was a businessman and a chief warrant officer. And I was ready to kick everybody's ass and make everybody run the thing like a business. It doesn't work that way. There's a process that it's a slow process, and it's good that it's a slow process. Otherwise, we'd be knee-jerking laws and people around all the time. And so, until I figured that out, like I said, I was a bull in a china shop. But anyway, so my job is to make whichever one of those guys successful. That's what I want to do.
Well, we've only got you've gone through pretty much my list of questions. And so there's really only one more thing I really wanted to talk to you about, and that is your projects with the Wounded Warriors.
I started the Wyakin Foundation. My partner and I did. Wyakin is a Native American, an Idaho Native American term for guardian spirit. And when we both retired out of the military, that transition was hard. You're told every day what color socks to wear. And so when you transition out of the military and you don't have anybody making those little decisions for you, and all at once you have to start doing it sounds silly, but it's something you have not been used to making those decisions. So that transition was hard for us. We started talking about that. And then we started thinking about our wounded warriors, our wounded veterans coming home, and ill veterans coming home. That transition for them had to be even more so. We chose when to retire. They were walking down a street and were blown up by an IED. They didn't make that choice. They were a killer stud in a war zone somewhere. And so they came home not knowing what they were going to do. So we started the Wyakin Foundation to help transition them from where they were, where they are, to the private sector. So we surround them with mentors. We get them into an education process that they want to. If they want to be a welder, we'll make them a welder. If they want to be a lawyer, we'll make them a lawyer. Some of their mentors will be in that industry. We give them professional development. Once a month, we give them a training class that colleges, universities don't teach. How to dress, how to write a resume, how to act at a formal black tie dinner, etiquette, those kinds of things. A lot of us sailors never got. And then we have, actually every year, we have a black tie affair where they get to sit at tables and practice what they learned. Called our Guardian Ball. We usually do that in the fall. They also do, and you'd be familiar with this, a community service event. They have to write a business plan for a community service event, carry it out, and then come back and report on it. And they all do it, and they all get it. And it's probably one of the greatest, personally, the greatest things I've ever been involved with. Because when these, I call them kids, but they're men and women, when they come into our program, there's no stars in their eyes. There's no gleam. It's just kind of gray and fuzzy, and you can just see they don't know where to go and they don't know what to do. They're just one step at a time trying to figure this out. We give them a mission again, and after about 4 months, they're driven and they know they've got a mission. They know where they're going to go, and we have alumni that are vice presidents that are giving back, that are very successful in the communities. And these are the leaders we want to form for our future, because they've had to make life and death decisions. Anything less than that is simple. They're the ones we want to be the leaders in our communities. So that's why we did it, and I'm very proud of that.
Well, we want to thank you for your service. You've done 20 years with the Navy, and you know, I like all military, but I am partial to the Navy.
That's right. It's the only real service.
Well, I'm not going to debate that one with you. Yeah, they can debate that one with me later.
That's right, yeah.
But we want to thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day, and we will let you get back to your lunch.
Okay. My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Everybody, this is Marv Hagedorn, candidate for Idaho Lieutenant Governor.